All right, our goals for today are you're going to describe how energy flows through our world. We've already talked about how energy moves through food chains and food webs. Today we're going to learn about the internal processes, so the things that are happening inside the bodies of organisms so that energy moves through the ecosystem. Then you're going to be able to explain the basics of the light reactions and the Calvin cycle. Those are the two parts of photosynthesis. And then you'll be able to describe what forms the basis of a metabolism. So you've probably heard the word metabolism before when people talk about, oh, that person just has a high metabolism, that's why they're skinny. Well, you're going to learn what a metabolism is today and what the pieces of it are. Okay? We'll just jump right in then. Though energy on Earth is continually coming to us from the sun, there's still a flow of energy on Earth that resembles a sort of cycle, but more of a path through organisms here on our planet. There are a few important things to remember about energy before we launch into understanding how it flows through things, and that is, 1, energy cannot be created or destroyed. Just like we have the law of conservation of matter, we have the law of conservation of energy that says matter cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change between forms. So if you feel like energy is being used up, likely what is happening is that energy is changing into a form that is not as easily visible for you as other types of energy. For example, electrical energy comes out of your wall sockets at home, can be changed to thermal energy by an iron. It's very easy to see electrical energy because you plug your device in and the device turns on and you know it has energy. And that energy, when your iron heats up and changes it to heat that you use to smooth the wrinkles in your clothes, that thermal energy can be a lot more difficult to see. So in many situations where you feel like energy is being lost or destroyed, what's really happening is that energy is being changed into thermal energy, which then dissipates out into our world in ways we cannot easily see. Photosynthesis stores energy. So during photosynthesis, light energy from the sun is absorbed by producers, and then they convert that into chemical energy, which is stored as glucose or as ATP, which is an energy storing molecule in the cells of organisms. So they convert it into a form that can be stored. Photosynthesis follows this general reaction, which should be familiar to you. 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O yields 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen. Okay. We've seen this equation before. Okay. This is a very general equation, and it leads a lot of younger students, when we teach them about it in 4th and 5th grade, to believe that photosynthesis is one reaction. That's an oversimplification. It's actually a series of different reactions. It can be broken down into a couple of basic parts, but there are lots of little reactions happening the whole time. The first of those two basic parts that we're going to talk about is called the light reactions. During the light reactions, light energy is converted into chemical energy. Okay, so remember I said that the whole process of photosynthesis is doing that. This first step is getting that energy into a form that cells can use. Chlorophyll, which is a pigment found in plants, which is green, absorbs energy from the sun. You'll notice if you ever have done an experiment where you tried to get a plant to grow under just green light, that it doesn't grow super well because the pigment is green because it's reflecting green light. So it doesn't absorb a lot of green light. It absorbs the other colors of light. So chlorophyll absorbs all this light from the sun, and then the electrons that are in the chlorophyll become energized. They become excited, basically. And they're released from those chlorophyll molecules, and they are passed along in a series of other molecules, and every time they get passed from one molecule to another, a little more energy is released. So remember how I said it's a series of smaller reactions? This is what I'm talking about here. So now we have some stored energy, but this is just the first half of the process of photosynthesis. At this point, any energy that's been stored has been stored in energy storing molecules, but it hasn't been stored in the form of glucose yet. In order to get glucose, we have to go through the next step. That last bullet point just says what I just said. All that extra energy is stored in energy storing molecules. Often you'll hear people refer to them as energy storing molecules. I believe the most common one in cells is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So, if that process does the energy storing, then how do we get glucose? I'm getting ahead of myself here. We got to talk a little bit more about the light reactions. During the light reactions, they also split water molecules apart, because in order to do the next step, when we get to the next step, we're going to need hydrogen atoms. And this is where our hydrogen atoms come from. We can't get them from carbon dioxide. There's no hydrogen in carbon dioxide. We have to get them from water. So they split off the hydrogen atoms that will later become part of glucose molecules. And then the oxygen that's in the water is released from the plant as a waste product. So to the plant, it's a waste. To us, it's very important. Now we can move on to the portion where we make glucose, and that happens in the Calvin cycle. So the Calvin cycle is a portion of photosynthesis that takes that trapped energy and puts it into the form of glucose so that it can be stored long term and then used later as needed. So the light reactions provide the energy in the form of those energy storing molecules for the Calvin cycle, and they provide the hydrogen. Then, in the Calvin cycles, that hydrogen is taken, and there's a series of chemical reactions that happen, and they make an unstable 6-carbon molecule from a 5-carbon molecule and carbon dioxide. So they take more carbon dioxide, and they use it to make these unstable 6-carbon molecules. Well, why is it important that they're unstable? Because then those unstable ones quickly split into 2 3-carbon molecules, and those small 3-carbon molecules are the basis from which we form lots of simple sugars like glucose. Eventually, the 3-carbon sugars go on to become more complex simple sugars like glucose. Energy reactions, like the ones we've been discussing, can be classified into 2 categories. They get classified into what's called anabolic reactions. These are reactions that build up complex molecules. So think ones that build starches, ones that build proteins. So photosynthesis would go in this category because it is creating molecules. They also require the input of energy to work. So if you're doing an anabolic reaction, you need energy. That's why we have to get energy from the sun to power photosynthesis. It's why you have to have energy in order to build proteins in your body. Okay? It requires energy to do, which makes sense. We're building up molecules where we've got to put energy into them. The other type of reaction are called catabolic reactions. These are reactions that release stored energy that's in complex molecules by breaking them down. So you can see why some people think about this a little bit like a cycle, right? You have anabolic reactions that take energy and build molecules, and then you have catabolic reactions that break down molecules and release energy. They're essentially the opposites of each other. So it should be no surprise that if photosynthesis is an anabolic reaction, that its opposite, cellular respiration, would be a catabolic reaction. Cellular respiration converts the energy that's stored in glucose into usable energy, and it follows the general reaction. 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 of oxygen yields 6 carbon dioxide, 6 H2O or water, and some amount of energy. So if you remember our reaction for photosynthesis, this is the exact opposite of that reaction. These reactions, the catabolic reactions, power the other types of reactions. So your body goes through catabolic reactions to release energy, and then it uses that energy that it got to run your anabolic reactions, where you are building proteins or things like that in your body. Together, the catabolic and anabolic reactions that an organism goes through make up that organism's metabolism. Your metabolism, or your metabolic rate, changes depending on what size of organism we're dealing with, and also at what temperature they take place. Okay? Which is why our metabolisms are relatively stable, because our bodies are able to keep our temperature at the same. But if you had an organism like a reptile that relies on its environment to keep its temperature stable, then its metabolic rate is going to go up and down depending on what its body temperature is. In terms of your personal metabolism, one way this can work itself out is that if you consume more calories than your body can metabolize, it will store those extra calories as fat. So you take in food, your body breaks that food down, and it gets energy out of it. If it has extra energy that it can't use for your anabolic reactions, then it will store that energy away for later, and it stores it as a fat molecule. If you consume fewer calories than your body metabolizes, then your body needs more energy than it's getting, and it's going to start breaking down molecules, going through some catabolic processes to get that energy. It'll start with fat, but if you don't have enough fat in your body to fuel it, then it'll eventually move on to breaking down proteins, breaking down your muscles, which is why people lose weight. Well, you lose weight fat first, and then theoretically, you don't want to get to the point where you're losing muscle. All right, this is the end of our notes.